Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy you're here today, and I want to welcome you to the third in the series of Beyond the Bar, Adventures in Law. You know, I didn't know my guest today, Rose, and we met on Zoom, and then I knew why they chose her for the show. You will find that her spirit, her energy, and her sense of humor and the ease in which she expresses herself are very, very attractive qualities. And I'm really happy you're with us today, Rose. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for sharing your time with me.
Okay. Now, the purpose of the show, or one purpose of the show, is to have lawyers on the show who really like what they do and who really like practicing law. And my guest today, Rose, exemplifies this. Rose has practiced in the area of estate planning and business for 15 years. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I like that you round down. It makes me sound younger. Feel free to round down to 10.
Okay, I'll round it down. 15 years. So, Rose, how is it you chose that area of law?
Just good luck. As with most people who are neurotic and type A and who tend to find their way into our industry, I had a plan. I had lists. They were impeccable. In fact, at one point, they were, to my slight shame, actually bound. None of them came to fruition. I was deeply convinced that I was going to be an intellectual property lawyer. I grew up in a tech family, surrounded by research and development, and I thought, wow, this is my calling. Got into it and discovered that I would really rather do anything else. It is not my cup of tea. I am not cut out for it, and actually had zero aptitude for it on top of it. So really not an ideal combination. And I was extremely fortunate that I was practicing at a small firm in Kelowna at the time. And if the guys at Benson are listening up in Kelowna, thank you. You have my longstanding gratitude. They basically said, okay, we hired you with a view to this. Clearly not what you're going to do. What would you like to try? And they let me put my finger in every pie imaginable until I found estate planning. Because let's face it, death and taxes, that's really the pinnacle of cool law. And I've just been really, really fortunate that the right people have come into my life at the right time. And so all of my brilliant plans that I did in the absence of those really great people got tossed out the window. And these people really helped me evolve my career by saying, yes, this can be fun. Yes, we're going to give you the platform to do it. And P.S., you could do it in Vancouver. And that was a big barrier for me because I grew up in small towns and I had family who were practicing law in LA. And so for me, my vision of big law was LA. These were some of the least happy people I knew. And so I never wanted to work in a big city because my aunts and uncles who had done that were really entrenched in their unhappiness and misery. So it took me a long time to not just do what I love, but find an avenue to do it where the demographics supported the ability to do it day in and day out. So that's me in a nutshell, and it really just boiled down to luck.
I'm going to get right to the point here. I'm going to get right to the purpose of this show, or one of the purposes. What's the secret of enjoying what you do, Rose? You enjoy it so much. What's the secret?
My completely unvarnished response is don't hang out with schmucks.
Is that it?
And it is that simple. And it can be people you work with. It can be the people you interact with as clients. If you engage with people that you respect and who do their job to the best of their abilities, it's a pretty darn good place to be. You're never going to love everything about everybody you deal with all the time. That does not exist. My take on that is if you're loving everything all the time, you're probably not doing everything you're supposed to be. But by and large, you can choose to surround yourself with people who make your practice enjoyable. That's the magic.
Okay. You know, I just read a study about young lawyers and of the disillusionment that many suffer practicing law. Some of it leads to anxiety issues and mental health issues. But what would you say to young lawyers who feel disillusioned about what they're doing?
I'm a little too distant from it to really understand the full scope of what they have to contend with. So anything I say, I would suggest should be taken with an entire salt lick. From what I've seen of young people who are entering law school or just coming out of law school, the expectations and how that interacts with the traditional legal model are very different than what they were when I started. in my vintage, you just got dumped in and you figured it out and people were there to support you, and there was a lot of winging it. And you had people there to catch you and you had safety nets around it. Now it seems to be much more structured, and even the hurdles to get into law school, the nature of the interviews and the papers and the requirements for extracurriculars, and then to carry those through while you're still starting and continuing to learn in your practice and then growing that practice seem incredibly onerous. My very limited input on that would be, do it in a way that you are comfortable with. And if the forum in which you find yourself doesn't lend itself to that comfort, change forums. And I think that's really daunting for young practitioners, simply because even though there's been a huge evolution in how we see law and how it can serve us in our careers, and that we're not necessarily tied to a traditional model, there is still, to some extent, I think, that concept of the brass ring. You do this path, you're a lawyer, you get through these particular milestones, and then poof, you end up at partner or something like that. And there's so many more avenues where we can deploy our skills now. And there's so many resources to help you find out what those are. If you're not enjoying what you're doing, that doesn't mean that exiting law has to be the answer. Take what you've learned, find people who want to do it in the way you want to do it, and you're probably going to find a way to make law a really happy career for yourself.
And so in your case, you love practicing law, you like it. There's good days and there's bad days. We've all had those. I've had terrible days. I've had awful days. I've thought about leaving the profession on many occasions.
Yeah.
In my time, we didn't have the expression work-life balance. We called it other things. But how have you balanced your personal life with your work life, Rose?
Well, this is a bit of a soapbox for me, because I would love if, as an industry and just as a language as general, we completely ditched the term work-life balance. I find it abhorrent and counterproductive. Not that I feel strongly about this, but in my mind, unless we happen to be fully independently wealthy, the concept that life can exist without a work component is completely fictitious. I don't think it serves us well to try and say, I'm balancing work with life. No, work is part of life, and I just have to integrate it. So how I do that is really quite simple. Private practice has afforded me the ability to set my own hours. And that has been vital in how I've managed to stay in private practice. I know a lot of people have to balance the demands of kids and extracurriculars and all of the things that come with family obligations. My biggest home obligation is my dog. Since she can't hear me, I'll just throw it out there. She's incredibly high maintenance, but that's okay. Because if I need to go home early to take her to the vet, I can do that. And my schedule normally is I work between 6 and about 3:30 in the afternoon, which, for people who aren't morning birds, they're looking at this thinking I'm off my rocker. But about 7 years ago, I was hit in a couple car accidents. Nothing catastrophic. My brain still works as well as it did before. I have all my parts, but it's really affected my need to manage my schedule, because my physio team and my IMS team and the massage team, all of those people who keep me kind of working, don't work late hours. My practice lets me do the schedule that works for me. So when it comes to navigating all the moving parts, just that incredible flexibility that this industry affords me has been a boon.
By the way, before I forget, we really want questions from the audience today. So you can, as we go along, ask your questions and we'll answer them at the end. Thanks, everybody. Rose, if you were approached by partners of a large firm who said to you, we've read a study how disillusioned young lawyers are. What can we do to keep them and keep them happy? What would you tell them?
I'd say start by asking the young lawyers. I think one of the infrastructure issues that most industries face is we're not asking the people who are most affected by it, which probably isn't going to get us the most accurate and actionable results. So ask the people who are affected by it, and then wait for it, implement some of the feedback they give you. And a lot of industries and a lot of firms are really good at this, but there are also systemic barriers to mass implementation. And I think it's beholden to both sides of the conversation to recognize that change can't easily happen overnight. And if you're a really small organization and there's 6 people, it's easy to implement it. If you're a national organization, rolling something out takes a lot more levels of buy-in and sometimes changes to structural things. And if we liken it to technology, it's really cheap, relatively speaking, for a small firm to go out and buy new computers for everybody. But if you have to do that at a national firm, there's an entire level of lead up that has to be implemented to get there. And I think if everybody's a little bit collaborative about this and recognizes that they're being heard and the conversations are being had, we're all probably going to be a little more inclined to bear with that process.
So you said, listen to everybody, read what they have to say, and implement it.
Not implement everything without question. Not all ideas are at an Einstein level. I certainly have had some incredibly bad ideas over the years, and thank heavens there were wiser minds who said, oh, sweetheart, we are not doing that.
Have you encountered yourself systemic barriers?
I would love to say unequivocally no, but there have been some from time to time. I've also been in environments where they were incredibly ahead of the curve on being inclusive and organized and creating opportunity. So I think that as an industry, it goes back to your earlier point about finding that environment that aligns with what's important to you, because other people might have found what I saw as a systemic barrier as exactly the right kind of structure in which to thrive.
Okay. And what would you tell a young lawyer who is encountering gender bias? I know you've written about this, and I'll get to that later, but what would you tell somebody who came to you and said, look, I think there's gender bias here in my firm. I'm not progressing as much as my friend, and I think it's because of gender bias. What would you tell them to do?
There's a lot of avenues open to it, and to some extent it depends on the structure that you're in. Often there's your mentor, your principal with whom you can speak and say, this is what I feel I'm encountering. Is there a perception issue where they think they're communicating something in a neutral way and I'm seeing it differently? Or am I taking it exactly the way it's intended to be received and we have a problem here? But sometimes having people who know the players longer than we have really informs it. And I don't in any way want to downplay the value and importance of perception, because if people are communicating in a way that seems to demonstrate bias, that's just as negatively impactful as something that is intentionally being done with bias. And so it still has to be solved, but it will often inform how we respond to it, because the level of education that has to flow from that is materially different in my experience. And there are some people who will not change. And if you're in a structure where there is just absolutely no buy-in to recognizing that there is that bias, or buy-in to going into those levels of education that have to happen with typically those senior practitioners, this probably isn't the right place.
So what would you tell people who had to approach a difficult partner who was, to use your language at the beginning, some kind of schmuck? How would you tell somebody to approach somebody like that?
I think it's environmentally specific, because I just look at my personal experience. If I had run into that where I first started practicing, and I was extremely fortunate that I didn't, I would have had no qualms about going to that individual directly and saying, look, this is what I feel is being put down. I'm not picking it up. What the hell is going on? That was the nature of the communication there. There was just no impediment to it. It was a free and open conversation and dynamic. Other environments aren't always that forthcoming, either because the individual who may be acting from that bias is deeply revered within the organization. Even if the problem is known, there's such a level of esteem attached to that personality that there's really not a comfortable way to directly approach them. Or it could just be that I don't feel I know them well enough to comfortably have that conversation, in which case, particularly if you're a junior practitioner, there should be internal resources available, whether it's the HR team or the inclusion and diversity team or your principal or your mentor, but take advantage of those. And if after going through those, you don't feel like there's any movement or that you're not being heard, then again, we're back to that really tough decision of, is this an environment I can comfortably adapt to and where I can thrive? Or is this an environment that is just not going to be suitable to my long-term trajectory and I need to relocate?
Okay, so if it's toxic, get out of there.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, I went through law and everybody said to me, you're always smiling walking down Hornby Street, you're always happy. It looks like you love what you do, and there's very few of you. Well, inside that was not always the case. inside I felt what everybody else felt at some point. Anxious, fear, all those emotions that you have from time to time while practicing
I wouldn't
law.
know. I've never been neurotic.
Have you ever been frightened about anything in law?
Terrified.
About what?
Oh, gosh. I'm not cut out to be a litigator. So for those of you who know me, you know that I'm a solicitor to the core. But I briefly dabbled in litigation during my articling year as part of that rounding out experience, and I found it to be agonizing, verging on just completely torturous. And every time I had to go into court, I really thought that a tiny little piece of my brain was going to completely melt down and my soul was going to die. I did not have the aptitude for it. The concept of speaking in front of these people and having to be prepared to respond to positions that I fundamentally found flawed, and the need to provide legal authority for something that in my mind seems patently obvious, absolutely paralyzed me. So I'm very acquainted with the concept of fear. And then as I went through my private practice life, there are still moments where I get a document in front of me. And I'm fortunate that I've been doing it long enough that it's not common that I get a document of a nature I haven't seen before. But sometimes it comes across my desk in a format or with terms in it that I go, how can I never have seen this? And sometimes the truth is because, well, this is a direct document. Nobody should have ever seen this. Sometimes it's, oh, wow, this is a really nifty spin on it. I should absolutely learn more about this and incorporate it. But the first moment of this, oh my gosh, I've been doing this long and I have no idea what the heck I'm looking at, it's just terrifying. But it's part of continuing to evolve as part of the practice.
Yeah. Having practiced family law for so many years, I, as many of my colleagues, had terrible days, had awful days. And that's when I learned to have a vodka martini with a double twist. What did you do?
I'm from the Okanagan, so I'm a wine drinker.
Okay. White or red?
Preferably white,
okay.
But at a bad day, any will do.
Okay.
Now, if you can blend it up and put a little umbrella in it, in my mind, that's really where you've reached happiness.
Okay. So any words of wisdom for young lawyers who are just having terrible, awful days at work?
There are no words of wisdom. There is no silver bullet. But at the end of the day, if you can go home, even if you've had the lousiest day you can possibly imagine, if you still find a certain level of joy in going back the next day, perhaps not on that particular file or having to deal with that particular individual, you're probably in the right industry.
How do you deal with difficult clients, Rose?
Oh, I fire them.
I know in your area of law, like in the area of law I practiced, there's a lot of emotion involved in estates and wills and succession. So how do you handle difficult clients that you can't terminate?
I would go so far as to say is there's almost no client that can't be terminated. And there's a difference in my mind between clients who have difficult facts and who are dealing with emotionally complex issues and people who are difficult humans. There is not enough money in the world to make me deal with difficult humans and to subject my team to intentionally difficult humans. If I don't want to deal with them, I certainly don't want my paralegal or my assistant to have to deal with them, or my juniors. That's not how we should expect to be treated, and we certainly shouldn't put others in a position where they should be treated that way. But where there's the difficult facts, that's part of the job. And some of it is the emotional soothing, some of it is explaining and decoding the process so it's less intimidating, but that's just part of the job.
So part of keeping your sanity and love of what you do is withdrawing or terminating clients who are very difficult personally, as opposed to having difficult facts that they're raising with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. You know, you have a great history of volunteering personally and professionally. And how important do you think that is? Rose, I note that you've been vice president of the Chilliwack Academy of Music.
Yeah, maybe gloss over that because I don't actually have any musical talent. That makes me sound much better than I am.
You were a director of the United Way Fraser Valley. It's funny, I wrote down here, I can't read my own writing. I was going to say Canadian Hamburgers Association of the Fraser Valley. It's Canadian Home Builders of the Fraser Valley. How on earth did you become a director of a home builder association?
Because I own a tape measure and a level. Really, and this is the one piece of advice that I feel is really true, because I did this all wrong. If somebody needed something and I had the time to do it, I volunteered. The problem that raises is it becomes a bit of a domino effect, and you end up volunteering at a staggering number of things, and it snowballs, and then all of a sudden you realize I'm in a lot of things that I don't actually have a meaningful connection with, either because I'm particularly passionate about it, or I've got a personal connection with it, or I just think it's neat and quirky and I'd like to be part of it. So I've really cut back in how I choose to use my volunteer time. And so I'm much more intentional and specific about it now. But for anybody who does want to volunteer, there's practically every board under the sun will take a lawyer, because at some point someone needs their bylaws redrafted. So be careful, you will get sucked down the bylaw rabbit hole.
Okay. One of your volunteer associations that you were part of was the Charlford House Society for Women. And I gather from what you just said, this is something that you were personally interested in.
They deal with basically sober transition services. And for all of us who have been following the overdose crises and things like that, we all know that it's a growing and burgeoning issue. It's under-resourced. And while there's notional commitment to it, there's still a huge amount of stigma attached to it. And the reason I really like the Charlford House organization is they're here in Burnaby. I'm a big believer in where I can helping out in my backyard. Yes, there's large international organizations to which I'll donate, but my dollar is probably going to have the biggest, best benefit, and my hours that I can help with are going to have the biggest and best benefit when I'm helping my neighborhoods. So that was great for me. I've really enjoyed working with them.
And how would you suggest a young lawyer get out there and find somewhere to volunteer in some area that they would like? How do you go about that?
There's lots of ways, and the CBA is a great resource, because lots of organizations who are, oh, yes, we'll take a lawyer on our board, yay, fresh meat. They'll often post when they need director positions filled on the CBA listings. So that's a great resource. If you're really not sure where to start, you can always just Google local charities and organizations in your area. And one of the things that's really nifty, see, this is where my tax dork gets to show. If you Google CRA charities listings, CRA lists through a charitable database resource how all charities actually deploy their resources based on their tax returns. So for a lot of people, when they're looking at volunteering, how resources are used, where overhead goes, that's really important for them. So you can actually go straight to the numbers to find that out. And then you can break it down by province or names and find things that are really going to resonate with you. But there's just an abundance of organizations who need help. So I think it's really easy to find one. We all can use it.
The study that I read, that I referred to earlier, found that the most cited negative impact on career progression was lack of mentors. Interesting that pay was not a negative impact. And I just raised that now out of interest. But you've been quite interested in mentorship and what you've called having a champion. In fact, I want to read something that you said in a blog.
Ooh, I've never been quoted before. This is very exciting.
In a blog called Life in Law in 2020. Rose, you said, as a woman in the practice of law and a strong advocate for others, it is surprising how ineffective I am at fighting for myself. I know I bring value to the table and I work hard enough. Why am I being overlooked when my colleagues are being recognized at a quicker pace, and how I can make myself seen? Signed, Climbing the Ladder. I take it by now that has resolved itself somewhat.
Well, I feel super let down because I didn't actually write that. That was a question somebody wrote into which I answered. So my dreams of being a quoted author have now just plummeted.
Have they?
But I did find myself very much in their position when I first started practicing. And I was extremely fortunate that I was in environments where I didn't have to be an advocate for myself. As a young practitioner, I was surrounded by people who wanted to advocate for me. And that was an incredible gift that I very much took for granted until I've seen that in the course of our industry, that is not always the norm. So to your point earlier, finding someone who will give you absolutely honest feedback about the quality of your work, how you're perceived within the firm, and who will be a champion for you within the firm is just one of the best resources we can develop.
And that's what I found interesting about the Life in Law blog, was you talking about finding a champion, because I hadn't heard of that before. We've all heard of mentors, but as I understand finding a champion, it's finding a partner in the firm who will help you navigate your advancement.
That's my take on it.
Okay.
I've been really fortunate, as I said, that there have been very, very limited circumstances where I didn't have somebody who called me out on my nonsense and who told me what my strengths were, helped me fix my weaknesses, build those strengths, and push me through those ranks. That is something that we should be doing for all young practitioners. And when you're within that firm dynamic, it's really hard to ask for that. It's much easier to develop that organic mentorship relationship where you're looking for someone to kind of guide you through the practice and the pros and cons of it. But in my mind, that champion distinction is really specific to the firm or the business environment where you're located, because they have to know the players and they have to be able, willing, and inclined to advocate on your behalf to help you grow within the dynamics of that firm, whereas mentors can be anywhere.
Is there time for partners to be champions these days?
Heck yeah.
Okay. And how do you go about finding your champion?
They will tend to find you. And it's a matter of recognizing it when they do, or at least that was my experience. There will be people who call you out on your junk. Don't take umbrage with that. Embrace that. You've got someone telling you that you are worth spending the time on to improve. That is a marvelous thing. The deadliest moment in my mind in private practice is when somebody stops giving you feedback because you're no longer worth investing in as far as they're concerned. So find somebody who says, yeah, I see these little holes, but we can fix that. And I'm going to help you do that. I think it's really easy to parlay that.
So if you found somebody, what would you say? Would you be my champion? Tell me what you would say.
That seemed very white knight. I'm having a fantastic visual.
Yeah, tell me what you would say. What would you ask that person to be for you? What would you?
I don't like the idea of asking somebody to be something. I think it's more a question of, hey, I really like the cut of your jib. I appreciate the feedback you're giving me. Can I come to you for more of it? This is kind of how I see my vision of the role in the firm long term. Can we work on that together? I don't think it has to have a label. I mean, that's my particular term as champion, but by no means is that pervasive. It's more about what the relationship is and how it evolves. And it may stay as the same person or it may change over time. But finding someone who's going to give you the straight goods, cultivate it. It's a gift.
Do you have any tips for how to get known in a big firm for a young lawyer? What do you do?
I'm such a useless resource on that front because I was never a young lawyer at a big firm. No, I started out in tiny little places.
You were a young lawyer, Rose, at some time.
Well, at some point I was a young lawyer.
You were a young lawyer, I can guarantee that.
You walk down the hallway and poof, you'd seen everybody. So the bigger question in my little bubble was, oh gosh, I've screwed something up. How do I not get noticed today?
Okay.
Within a big firm, I would say you want to talk to brighter minds than mine.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you some difficult questions now, okay?
Okay.
Are you ready?
Do my best.
Okay. So if you didn't practice law, what would you like to do professionally?
Oh, I would work in archival studies for medieval history.
Now, I really wanted to have an exciting show today. The next show is on medieval history. I hope our producer here will ensure that there are a lot of registrants. Can you repeat that again, please, Rose? What was that?
I would do archival work with medieval history. It kind of gets branded as the Dark Ages, but they have all of these beautiful manuscripts that tell you about culture and history and the distinction between privileges and rights and a huge sector of society that wasn't granted rights. I find the whole thing fascinating. And Monty Python has entire movies about it, so how bad can it be?
What was your first job?
Well, I grew up in a family business, so it was probably watering plants and picking up coffee cups. My first legitimate non-family business job was actually helping out at a law firm over a summer.
Okay. And what do you spend too much money on?
Oh, shoes and purses.
Okay.
I am a cliche to the core.
Okay. Now, if you're in Shoppers Drug Mart and London Drugs and you're paying for something and there's all these magazines up there that you can pick, which one would you pick? After a difficult day at work, what would you pick?
I skip the magazines and go to the books.
Would you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love all kinds of books. They can be the trashy beach reads, which I love as brain candy. They can be a biography on Churchill, who really just had a wonderful set of names in his family. And I think everybody should name their English bulldogs after them.
Which was?
Oh, Clementine is my absolute favorite.
Okay.
But any book, because most of them you can pick up. It could be the end of the day, you breeze through 10 pages, or it could be something where you just sit down and you have a good read for a couple hours, but it transports me. And I can't do that with a magazine.
Is that what you do to chill out? Read?
Oh, yes.
Okay. What's your favorite podcast?
Well, this one, naturally.
Good answer. How about your favorite non-healthy food?
Anything that combines peanut butter and chocolate. That is the food of the gods in my world.
You can tell we're almost done here because I'm asking these questions.
The important stuff.
Yeah, the real important. So this is a really important question, Rose. Would you prefer to see Top Gun, Maverick, or Titanic, the love story?
Oh, Top Gun.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Now, this is a question that I'm sure will be relevant to somebody who's watching. Would you rather see the movie Runaway Bride or Gone with the Wind?
That's a tough one. Gone with the Wind really does not hold up particularly well over the ages, but there's an intermission so I can get more popcorn. I'm going to call that one a wash.
Okay. Anyways, I want to thank you for being with us today. There are some questions. The first question I don't think I'm going to answer. Is that right? Do you take an hour for lunch? That's the first question. I don't. The answer is yes. Now, Rose, what was your undergraduate degree in, and why didn't you pursue that field instead of law school?
Well, the flippant answer is that I was vastly overachieving and got a double major in medieval studies and history. And I just couldn't pin down which of those lofty ambitions to pursue. The reality was that to go that path, I would have had to completely break the bank, spend a lot of money, and zip over to Europe to do grad school there. And I had already spent a year traveling abroad after high school and living quite far away before tech really kept us connected. And that just didn't hold a huge amount of appeal for me. And I think I had mentioned earlier that a lot of where I've ended up in life is due to fantastic people coming into my life at the right time. That was how I ended up in law school. And I had not considered doing the LSAT. I kind of thought of this as how I had seen it evolve in my family in LA and as about as attractive as dishwasher. And Dr. Tim Haskett, who was teaching medieval studies and the history of law at that point, said, well, have you considered law school? And I went, oh gosh, that sounds awful. Could we watch paint dry instead? But he was onto something there, and I just fell in love with it.
Okay. Now, the question about an hour for lunch was this, and that's in reference to work-life balance. So I really missed that one, Rose. Do you take an hour for lunch?
Depends on the day.
Okay.
I think most of us find ourselves in practice that have crunch times and down times.
Yeah. When
it's crunch time, if I'm really organized, I'll have brought something with me, and if not, I'll run to the food court. But yesterday, it's not a particularly onerous period, so I was gone for lunch for 2 hours.
Okay.
I think it's just moderating things based on availability and need, and it works itself out.
Okay. There's another question here, probably one of the better questions I've had in the series. If you were a superhero, which I already think you are, if you were a superhero, who would you be? I know it's going to be some feudal geek nerd answer.
Well, normally I would trend
tell.
that way, but actually I would say I would skip the superhero and I would go to the Incredibles. I want to be the gal who made the costumes and stopped all those people from getting capes, because I thought she was just kind of the cat's pajamas.
Okay. Thank you again, Rose, for being with us today. And I want to thank, before we have our next show, which is September 20th. We're going to have a break for the summer. I want to thank a couple people. I want to thank Mary Kingston, our producer. I want to thank Vic and Darren, the technical guys, and Adam, the marketing guy. I want to thank Jessica, who's a program director. And I want to thank Linda Russell, who's our CEO at CLE and who took the risk of having me on the show. And on September 20th, I hope you all watch the show. Two of my favorite lawyers, now I have three favorite lawyers, Rose. Two of my favorite lawyers in the whole city, Wendy King and Cheryl Desaw, who juggle more things in life that I can ever imagine, are going to be with me together.
Amazing.
And Wendy is Senior VP dealing with environmental and social governance at Capstone Copper. And Cheryl Desaw, she wins the Venture Vote annually. So popular. She was also voted Female Trailblazer of the Year.
Sounds like
in
it's well deserved.
2021 by Canadian Lawyer magazine. And I'll have them both in September 20th. Don't miss it. Everybody have a great summer, and we'll see you in the fall. And thank you all for watching.